Welcome to Generative Artificial Intelligence for School Administrators. We're thrilled that you're here tonight. And just to give you a preview on the next hour, we're going to spend a little bit of time kind of giving a brief introduction to artificial intelligence. My guess is that the typical member of our audience is probably a little bit AI savvy already, in part because you came to a webinar about artificial intelligence. So that certainly says something about our potential audience. But we're hoping you'll share this with others that perhaps are new or maybe a little scared or concerned about artificial intelligence to help kind of build capacity and think about how we can use this amazing, weird, wild, out there, futuristic tool set in order to make your daily jobs as school administrators easier. So again, my name is Jason, and Mike and I serve as the tech savvy administrator and tech savvy teacher in residence for Northwest Council for Computer Education, and we've been around for a long time. I did ask AI to generate a couple of images of what it thought we looked like. And I don't know, it's kind of close, right, Mike? I mean, that's
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the upper left one is the one that really, captures us, the true nature. So
yeah. And I will say that's exactly what my hair looked like before the age of 20. So I guess it did find that about me as well. But when I share AI generated images, and by the way, these were like I gave it a photo and said create new images of these guys, and it did exactly that. When you look at our actual like real photographs, I'm not sure they're all that much better. So maybe the AI
it's true.
generation
It's true.
is a better thing, right? So Mike and I help run the Montana Digital Academy, which is Montana State Virtual School. We've been working together there since 2014, and I worked a couple years before that, before Mike joined us. And Mike and I have been working on projects together since 2008, right? Is that's the case?
I
And
believe
so
so. Yeah.
yeah, we frequently attend and present at the conference, and we will be there in February of this year. Can't wait to see all of our NCC friends and hope you will join us for that wonderful event. But today we're here to talk about generative artificial intelligence, and we're going to do this in three acts today. The first act is going to be a brief introduction to what AI actually is. Second, Mike is going to talk a little bit about tool choice. Like, there are now literally tens of thousands of artificial intelligence tools to choose from. So, some advice on how to do that. And then finally, Mike and I will do a couple of quick demos with school administrators in mind to encourage you to start tiptoeing into the artificial intelligence world in the best hopes of really finding a personal assistant or some type of help for you on a daily basis to help you do your job that much better. So we'll start with part one, which is introduction. What is artificial intelligence? And one of the things that's complex about artificial intelligence is that it's been around for a long, long time. In fact, the term is rounding the bend to be almost 100 years old. And so when people say the rise of artificial intelligence or it's a new era of artificial intelligence. It's actually a concept that's been around for some time. And even chatbots are not a new phenomenon either, as the very first chatbots have been around for nearly 50 years. It's not a concept that's in any way new. So, really, when we talk about AI, what is artificial intelligence? Well, there's a really easy definition of it from a very broad perspective, which is it's the ability of computers to perform tasks like humans. So, in other words, it's intelligent, like a human would be intelligent, but artificially because it's based on computer-based ones and zeros. And it can do things that we don't typically associate with computers, even in the modern era, like problem solving, reasoning. It can learn from data or learn from its surroundings. It can understand language and also recognize patterns. That's nothing new. And in fact, we've been using artificial intelligence tools for decades, even since the early internet. But I would go a step further to say that computers have been mimicking humans for some time now. It's nothing new and no new phenomenon. So when we say the rise of artificial intelligence or 2025 is the year of artificial intelligence or artificial intelligence is going to change everything, What we're probably talking about is generative artificial intelligence, or GAI. And sometimes you'll hear GAI be general artificial intelligence, which is a whole different phenomenon. Part of the struggle here is that there is a lot of scientific terminology that also crosses over into science fiction terminology as well. Luckily, authors have been writing about the future of artificial intelligence for decades and decades and decades in the fiction world. So we actually have a lot of vernacular that goes along with what might be sentience and what happens when the machines figure out that they are thinking largely on their own. But that's not what we're here to talk about tonight. And so when we say generative artificial intelligence, it's actually a subsection of AI. And if you talk to a lot of data scientists and call it artificial intelligence and not generative artificial intelligence, you might even get a little pushback because the concepts are distinctive. Artificial intelligence is the large umbrella term, and generative artificial intelligence is one small part of that larger community. And so GAI is a type of AI that allows you to create. And when I say create, I mean text, images, audio, code. And the way it does this, very simply, is by taking training data or reading, listening, processing as much information as it can. And the more information it processes it, the more likely it can mimic that information. So when you see generative artificial intelligence as producing something or speaking to you or engaging with you, it feels very real, but at the same time, it's really just mimicking what it's learned based on its massive training data. And usually, and if you've seen a presentation that Mike and I have done before on generative artificial intelligence, we have a thousand demos. And in fact, if anything, we've maybe overdone image generation in this world. But just very quickly to give you a sense of what this looks like, this is ChatGPT. You can go up to what's referred to as a large language model or one of these chatbots and ask a question like, "Hey, what's the Cuban Missile Crisis?" And it will pop up an answer. And this answer isn't web searched. This answer isn't written by a human. It may be close to something that feels like it's someone else's work, but in every case, or at least in the vast majority of cases, the output from an artificial intelligence tool is generated from scratch. And that's the beginning of starting to separate your mind from the way computers have worked up until the age of generative artificial intelligence and what happens now. Because now, if you walk back tomorrow and ask the same tool the same question, you're probably getting the same general answer because there is a large established world set of facts about the Cuban Missile Crisis, but maybe it'll give it in a different format. Maybe it will word it a little differently. Maybe it will create a falsehood somewhere in there, in the same way that if you ask the same person a question knows the answer to 100 times, on day 47 of asking that question, maybe it gets it a little bit wrong because generative artificial intelligence actually acts a little more like a human than it does like a machine, which is one of the reasons why I think it's tough sometimes to wrap your brain around these extraordinary tools. So another example, and then here's the long essay there on the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now, what if I go back and give it like a more specific request? I just don't want to know what the Cuban Missile Crisis is. I now want to have an informational text aimed at eighth graders. And so in this case, I'm giving it more direction to try to narrow the feedback it gives me. So my prompt, as it's called, says write an informational text about the Cuban Missile Crisis aimed at eighth grade readers. Right, so lots of key terms in there. Informational text. The topic is the Cuban Missile Crisis. Eighth grade readers is my target. And I also wanted to use the 5 following vocabulary words: containment, diplomacy, blockade, capitalism, and communism. If you're in a district that, for example, does big, thick vocabulary lists, right, this might be a way to actually generate text based on the vocabulary list that your district has developed. But in this case, it does exactly that. It creates an essay for me that's an informational text that's in the style of what a typical eighth grader might see inside of a history classroom. Okay. So in this particular case, I've asked it to do the same, but I want it aimed at eighth graders. But this time, I want it as a lyrical poem. So in October days of '62, a tale of tension, dark and true, two mighty powers, East and West, pit courage, will, and nerves to test. And so whatever you want to do, it's probably going to do it for you, whether it's realistic or not, whether it's useful or not, whether it's not typically how we present that type of information. It's an open book that you can request things from and really dictate what the output looks like. So to give another example, in this case, we are going to go to, this is Claude, which is another a model that you can go to that offers a chatbot. In this case, I'm going to ask it to create a project management plan for implementing a 4-day school week in a rural school. Hot topic right now in our home state of Montana. And again, it's going to do exactly what I asked it to, but this time Claude is going to do an interesting phenomenon. It's a feature of its chatbot. It's going to kind of give me metacognitive information. In other words, what strategies it used to write the plan on the left. And it's going to give me an actual plan written in a final format on the right. And over time, these tools are becoming more and more functional to where you're not just getting an output and then you stick it in Word and then Word, you can modify it there. You can start asking it questions or even ask it to modify certain parts of the output. It's just going to change it right in front of you. And that to me is a really extraordinary set of tools ahead of you, but you can start to see pretty quickly why these tools might be useful in an educational context. Here's another example. This is Meta AI from the folks that used to be called Facebook. I'm not even logged in. They just have a free model you can go to at meta.ai. Write an email to a disappointed parent that wants to discuss their child getting cut from the volleyball team. She wants a meeting with the coach, but I'd like to attend as the principal. I'm the vice principal of the school. And here we have a very pleasant, very professional email that's been crafted by the Meta AI tool. And I'm not sure if I would send this without review. In fact, I know I wouldn't send this without reviewing this first, right? Like I'm allowing it to do the early parts of this, but you can see here already that this email is very polite. It doesn't give too many details. All the things we might tell, especially a first-time school administrator to do when dealing with a crisp parent. And yet I didn't have to sit at a blank screen for 10 minutes trying to figure out how to start a challenging email. And again, this is the Meta AI tool. Then you can do things that I think are nothing short of science fiction. And you can't really see it super well here. I think I can do this. Can I do that? I can't. What you see here is a photograph of a big board of notes, right? So someone did a brainstorming session on a whiteboard in a conference room, and what they did was put together a lot of ideas about how to communicate the science behind a particle accelerator that they eventually want to turn into an infographic, right? And if you've ever been part of any brainstorming, one of the most challenging things is how do you get the stuff on the wall to something useful later, right? And we take photos of it, and there are scanning apps, and that's nice and all, but someone still has to type that stuff out, right? And a lot of good old-fashioned brainstorming ends up in a Google Doc or in a Word Online doc because, frankly, we need the opportunity to have that information later without having to transcribe it. But look what I did here. I just stuck the photograph and I said, I want you to turn these notes into a structured logical outline. And so now what it's done is taken the all the text from the whiteboard, which by the way was kind of organized, but kind of not organized. It's turned it into an outline of a plan for an infographic, including the target audience, what the core message is, and giving me advice about turning that into an infographic, which I think is nothing short of extraordinary. And you can see already where this might be extraordinarily useful to someone who is a busy knowledge worker, which includes everyone on this call today, right? But I want to take it a step further. Now, the graphics generation is pretty good, right? But it's not like you can say, hey, turn this into a infographic for me now that I've given you all these parameters, except that you can, really. And that's exactly what I did here, right? I used DALL-E 2 or 3, which is ChatGPT's image generator. And to be clear, this is not a finished infographic, right? Like the text is all garbly, which is sometimes a factor here. But this is also about 4 times better than DALL-E was doing just 1 year ago. But the fact that it created even a kind of sort of draft of what the infographic might look like, the style of what it might look like, maybe some ideas of the kind of imagery I'd want to use, that's a pretty good estimation, considering that about 30 seconds before this was nothing more than a photograph of some whiteboard notes, right? And this is what this looks like if you look a little deeper into the process. So again, really extraordinary that this even works at all, to be honest with you. And remember, today is the least functional AI is going to be any day into the future. 6 months from now, 12 months from now, who knows what happens. Okay, a couple other quick images here. This is another example of an image, a generated image. This one's from a tool called Midjourney that's supposed to look like a futuristic classroom in the style of 1960s science fiction. That is also a futuristic classroom, but it's also a generated photo from Midjourney. And what I would say about this one is that this could easily be mistaken for an actual photograph, right? There's a term in media called glance media, where we actually spend very little time looking at even information graphics unless we're super interested or invested in the information. The average amount of time we spend looking at a graphic is less than 3 seconds. And my guess is, other than these students are dressed up weirdly, right? Apparently they go to the Mark Zuckerberg school, and that's the outfit or the outfit there of the day, right? But other than that, I mean, and everyone's in a black hoodie, like this could easily be mistaken for, yes, a well-funded classroom, but a modern day classroom, for sure. I like generating all sorts of kind of strange images. This is Harry Truman Lego Man. It's the reason why that I'm kind of glad I'm not in a classroom anymore, because I would lose so many sleepless nights to generating images for my history courses. And then I'm not sure if you can see all of these or not, but I love a good badge and sticker. It's the on-demand printing has been a real game changer for my sticker game. But these are all just examples of what I would be making if I were a classroom teacher right now. There's a French Revolution wizard badge. There's a World War II military history master. We make badges all the time at work. Have them printed up for when we do celebrations of great accomplishments. And again, I think this is a real game changer for folks. And then I have no idea if this is going to work or not, but this is a video that's made around social media. You might have seen this one before, but this is a classroom from Turkey, and you probably can't hear the music, right? Doesn't really matter. But what this teacher did was they created, or she took pictures of her students, and this is probably going to violate some U.S. Personal identifiable information rules, but she asked the student what career they were interested in, and then asked an image generator to create an image of those students as their future self in the role that they envisioned, and then printed out a copy for them, right? And you can see by the reaction on these kids' faces that it's just mind blowing, right? And there'd be no other way to really do this, right? Like unless you had an artist that's willing to put an extraordinary amount of time to make this happen. But I am completely charmed a bit by the prospect of how we can help our students learn and dream with this technology. But I want to be really clear, that's not what we're here to talk about today. In fact, if anything, the other thing I would want to tell you is that if anything, one of the struggles of AI is that it does introduce so many challenges into teaching and learning that it's a conversation that's really hard to ignore the impacts of that. But what we're here to talk about today is you as an administrator, like how you can start slowly inserting these into your workflow in order to make some change. So generative AI, very powerful, can generate words, pictures, audio, video, and it also has the power to really, in extraordinary ways, process information like no set of tools that's been available to the typical consumer like ourselves to this point in technological history. Okay. So now I'm going to hand it over to Mike, and Mike is going to talk a little bit about tool selection. So, Mike, I'll hand it off to you, sir.
Well, thanks, Jason. So when we're talking about tools, the first place we're going to start is a website that you may or may not be familiar with, which is There's an AI for That. And you can also go to TAAFT. literally lets you search for all the different AI instances that are out there that do specific functions. So you put in the function that you're interested in, you get this huge list. As a matter of fact, that it's over 25,667 current AI in this list, right? And so, of course, all the big hitters are there that we're all familiar with. But what I love about this site is, like, one of the things that Jason and I advocate for is finding some time in your week to just play with AI. Maybe that's a half an hour here, maybe it's an hour there, but really there's a lot of fun in the exploration. And if you're in that mindset and that mode of doing some exploring, this site does a great job of just letting you kind of go down that explorer's journey of, this week I'm interested in playing with some image creation, so I'm going to search for image creation. This week I want to do some exploration around music or audio generation. All these things, you can literally get hundreds and hundreds of different AI tools out there. The other thing we really like about this site is a good job of categorizing what you can do in the free tier versus the paid tier. So you can get a little information right off the bat to get a sense of what's available prior to jumping into that tool. But I think the place for people to start that are really new to this is to ask the question of your district, do you already have something, right? Most districts are starting to look at adopting a tool set. And as it turns out, those districts that are Microsoft districts or Google districts, which are most of the school districts across the United States, have started to adopt tools. So if you're in a Microsoft district, there's a decent chance that your district is at least looking at adopting or has already rolled out Copilot for your district. And I think the important thing to understand about this is that when your district adopts a tool, there's enterprise level data protection in your tool. So, what we're talking about here is a difference from just a personal account going to a specific tool and signing up. At the school level, there's been an enormous investment by all the big players in data protection. And I think that's a really important piece. Same goes for our Google districts that are out there. Google's version is called Gemini. And it's the same idea. You can see on this next slide here, the Montana Digital Academy, we're a Google organization. And you can see here that it specifically states on the education version of Gemini in our Google education workspace that any chats that originate from our Digital Academy domain are not used to improve their models. And so, it's a shout out to all of our big companies out there that they're being very thoughtful about the educational divide that needs to happen around both that PII data and more largely training their big large language models on education data. That's something that would never fly. As a matter of fact, many states have laws against that. And so I'm very happy to see that, our big companies are being very thoughtful about this rollout. So here's Jason and I's current list of mainstream AI tools. But the thing about it, you look at this list and there's folks that already are thinking like, whoa, slow down, Mike and Jason, that's a lot. Well, remember, we're nerds. And so this is our piece here, right? So these are the type of things we love to dive into. But what we have for you is a much more realistic pared down list. And so in the chatbot space, what we recommend is it to start with OpenAI's ChatGPT, right? They are the market leader at the current process as far as what they're doing with the technology, all the different pieces that they can do. It's a great place to start to get a pretty comprehensive look at what's possible. When you're looking at a specific image generator, that we really recommend is this ideogram. And what I like about this in particular is the free tier works great. I will warn that like midday, it tends to bog down just because this has become a very popular image generation tool, but it does a fabulous job of creating a wide variety of images. And then the other tool that's out there is NotebookLM, which was developed by Google. And this is something that Jason and I have been exploring a lot at the Digital Academy. What this allows you to do is set up a notebook where you can input specific data pieces. So for instance, a example that we just recently did is at Montana Digital Academy, we have our website, we have all of our documentation about processes and procedures. We started loading all of that into NotebookLM. Some of our staff members that haven't worked at MTDA as long as Jason and I have a way to ask questions in a walled-off garden from information that we have fed to NotebookLM. And what's been so powerful about that is some of our newer employees can ask questions like simple things. Does MTDA offer a cybersecurity course? And as it turns out, we uploaded our course catalog, we uploaded all of our procedural stuff. And so it just searches through those updated files and was like, yep, MTDA offers cybersecurity. And so that becomes a real practical tool. And I think one of the things that we really like about NotebookLM as well is they have this cool feature where as you start to feed it information and upload whatever, there's one button click to turn that information into a podcast, which is just wild to see. If nothing else, it's worth it to take a stab at that. If you haven't seen that yet, is just fabulous. I also have a warning for you, which is, when you are looking at either the Android stores or Apple's App Store, there is a ton of products right now that are showing themselves as a chatbot. And as you can see from the screenshot, they're all using very similar icons. And all of these examples here are built upon something, right, on some platform, but it's creating some confusion in the market. And our warning is be careful here in what you're downloading. Not to say that any of these necessarily have nefarious purposes, but we just want to be extra cautious when we're on any app store to really understand what it is we're downloading and to look at that specifically before you just willy-nilly download pieces, as a word of caution. One other thing that we've seen that is a trend is every EdTech site, tool, anything that's existed for any amount of time, you may have noticed that everybody's touting AI, and they're even saying we've got even more AI now. And the truth is that some of these sites are overhyping what AI actually brings to the tool. So a bit of a discerning eye when you're evaluating tools moving forward. Everybody's going to say they have an AI component. I think a couple tips I would say to look at is to look into the fine print of what information is actually being shared with the tool. If that information can be sold, if it can be used to train their models. There is a lot of details there that are important. Some of the cool, I mean, I will say kind of interesting, cool tools that play off of your profile picture. It really important to look at the details of what they can do with your image and likeness, because some are very clear about keeping it locked down, others not so much. So be careful there. And then one of the last recommendations I have for you is a podcast, actually. The Hard Fork podcast is just fabulous. When the AI movement started, there's a journalist from Platformer, there's a journalist from the New York Times. They're super fun and engaging too. They're two nerdy guys. If you enjoy listening to Jason and I, you'll really like the Hard Fork guys, because they're kind of like who Jason and I wish we could be, if we ever got really cool. But they're fabulous at keeping a pulse of what's going on in the AI world. And one of the things they shared now over a year ago is, and again, these are two people that are steeped in the AI culture. They said it's one of those weeks where it kind of feels like a whole year happens in one day. And you're like, wait a minute, I keep track of this stuff for a living and I can't keep up. Right. I don't know if you've paid any attention to the announcements that have come out the past 2 weeks from OpenAI, Google, Microsoft. Everybody is releasing just a huge wave of new functionality and new tools. And it is a lot to keep up on. And so I had already suggested this idea of playing with the technology and dedicating a little time to it. Finding different pieces to keep yourself up to date is, I think, a really smart thing for educators to do, because this is coming whether we want it or not. And to be quite honest, it's been here for a while, and we're kind of getting to the next generation already of what can happen and what is possible, and it's wild. And so keeping yourself tuned into what's happening really helps you be a little bit more engaged in the conversation, and helps you be an educational leader to your staff. I mean, that is, like it or not, AI is here to impact all things, including education. And as leaders, we, have a responsibility, we feel, to keep up on things that are impacting education. And that definitely is true of AI.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mike. Okay, we're going to jump into
Yeah,
part
you
3
bet.
now. And how can you use AI as a school leader? And I will tell you right now, I'm going to echo what everyone says. You need to be super careful about AI. AI does this, AI does that. AI tracks your data. Who knows where the data is going? We don't really understand these tools. Those are all correct pieces of the puzzle right now, but I don't want that to stop people from experimenting with the tools, in part because if users like yourself that are very thoughtful and want to do this the right way, especially when it involves students in education, we need to be part of that conversation. But I also want to note one other fact about artificial intelligence is also true. Yes, be careful, but remember, artificial intelligence, the big umbrella artificial intelligence, and to a lesser extent, generative artificial intelligence, is very much a part of our tool set pre generative AI. Before ChatGPT was released to the public in November 2022, there were literally thousands of ways that the internet was already using artificial intelligence, not to mention more direct impact on both your data and the way we interact with one another. This article from Forbes does a really good job of pointing out the ways we were already using AI, but if you use Face ID on your phone, you're using a form of artificial intelligence. If you use social media, you're darn right you've been exposed to some way, shape, or form to artificial intelligence. Grammar checker, spell checker, search engines, digital voice assistants, smart devices, map and direction apps, banking and finance apps, shopping recommendations, media recommendations. If you Netflix and chill ever, and you're charmed by the little ways it tries to find ways to engage you in by creating creative movie sections, that's all AI generated stuff. It's been around for some time. The only difference between the stuff that we were already using and the stuff that's now available to us is that the tools are much more functional for sure. But more importantly, they can do more directly useful things to you as a school administrator and also as a human being. So 5 things we want you to know before you start playing with AI. And you've probably heard all these things before, but I think these are appropriate to mention. First, AI doesn't tell the truth all the time, and they call it hallucinating. But I think it's probably just better to say it makes things up occasionally, right? But AI lies. Period. End of story. Second, it's awfully confident. And I liken it to if you've ever worked with an extremely confident seventh grader, not the least bit conflicted with doubt, that's what AI acts like in a lot of cases. And sometimes it will try to talk you into something that you know is absolutely not true. Third, it's biased, and that's because it's trained on the internet, which is biased. AI has read the internet, maybe even against copyright laws if you believe the New York Times, but it's biased, and you have to watch out for that because it's not citing sources typically, and even when it is, it may be approaching those sources in a biased way. Next, it's not cited when you're not using one of the search engine tools that's available. And even when you are, it's putting something between you and the original source. And so you want to be careful about that. And just remember, it's untested, right? We are the crash test dummies of AI, and we've been doing a pretty good job, I think, of putting it through its paces. But that's something to remember when you're using these tools. And last, do not ever share your personal identifiable information for you or anyone else with these tool sets. Not that there aren't safe ways to do it, there are, but for right now, especially in your job as a school administrator, I would not put any personal identifiable information in any of these tool sets because we don't exactly know how the privacy pieces work yet, right? And I feel a little more comfortable if I were using, for example, the University of Montana has Copilot for all of its employees, and we have the enterprise data protection that's part of that process. I would feel safe there. I would also feel safe with Gemini, with the school edition, because it's also not training on your data. But I think it's important right now in these kind of Wild West days of artificial intelligence to be super careful. Mike and I also have some advice for you about strategies to use when using AI. And these are ways that we think you can approach this very thoughtfully. The first one, practice makes better, or as I put here, pretty good. You'll get better with it over time. And everyone wants to approach this like it's a Google search, right? I'm going to tell you what I want, and you're going to give me pages so I can go find it. That's not how these tools work. And the more you use them, you start to build a bit of a sophistication about how these tools are different than traditional tool sets like a search engine. Next, dig down into your teacher soul and treat an LLM like a student that needs to be taught. Because if it's not giving you what you want, give it better instructions, right? If the output isn't what you're looking for, then be more specific in what you're looking for to get better results. And we'll tell you some strategies about that in a moment. Next, take careful notes. My Google Doc full of random AI stuff is about 70 pages long now. It's been going for 2 years. The first 25 pages are all completely out of date and random, and even the stuff from last week is starting to get a little outdated with all the stuff that's been released in just the last 7 days. But taking notes and approaching it like almost a scientific experiment over time, I think is really important. Be share your best practices with others. And the last one I'm also going to tell you is don't rely on it yet, right? The biggest mistake I've seen people make with generative AI, especially in context of schools, is that it's 4:45 and there's a grant application due at 5, and so you're like, well, it's either ChatGPT or nothing. So you have it write all the answers to that, and you don't even look at the material, and you press send, and then you get a question a couple weeks later about why is it you're claiming that your school has a 0% poverty rate when the grant was looking for schools at a certain level, which your school meets, but it just didn't report the information correctly, right? Well, that's because, and this is a rule that we very much enforce with our colleagues that use AI, don't use AI unless you're willing to take responsibility from its output. If you're not willing to take responsibility for its output, don't use AI. I think is the most core advice. There are some folks that seem to be accepting of AI in various tasks, but then want to point the fingers at the AI. I think that's a mistake. The bottom line is that if you choose to use these tools and you didn't vet out the what it spit out, that's on you. And I think that's a very important line to draw from a professional standpoint. Mike and I like to see all this stuff as a mind shift. And one of the things that we like to talk about and think about is what are these tools for? Like, what do you do with them, right? Well, one of the things that we like to think about is that if you think of it as a thought partner, or Mike used a really good analogy when we were talking earlier about this today, see it as your personal assistant, right? That's a really good way of trying to treat these as a meaningful set of tasks. It's extremely functional. It's so amazing what you can do with this. But in the same way that you never leave mission critical things to someone else unless you're willing to check the work yourself, don't do the same thing with AI, right? You would never farm out your judgment to someone else if you're the individual responsible for that judgment. Well, don't farm that out to AI either, but instead see this as an incredible personal assistant. And the way to start that, we think, is by just simply playing with AI. And if you haven't done so already, now's a good time to do so. So I'm gonna pull on Mike now. We're going to talk about the strategy of AI, which is something referred to as prompting.
Thanks, Jason. So what is prompting? Well, it is the process of providing an input called a prompt to a generative AI model to guide its output. So really, this is the basic set of commands, as Jason demonstrated earlier in the presentation, of putting in a command to get an output. Some have called it promptgramming, and it really is. There are certain rules and strategies and frameworks that we're going to show you about how to prompt in a way to get your desired output. So there definitely are some best practices, and there's lots of articles out there that will talk about those best practices. But generally, one of the main takeaways is the idea that being specific in your prompting helps get better outputs, right? And so there's a lot of different strategies that we're going to demo here in a minute. Jason had talked about garbage in, garbage out. Well, also quality out is very true. The other thing to know is that there are plenty of folks that believe that learning strategies around prompting is a waste of your time because some say the tools are just going to advance to the point where you don't really need to understand the process. We feel a little differently about that between the two of us because we really feel that the prompting practice provides a skill set in processing information and thinking about the underlying process of what you're actually getting out. So this article specifically, another one saying that prompting isn't the most important skill. It's about the will to learn. And really what we're getting at here is that what we feel prompting is equivalent to is the prompting. And another analogy I'd like to make is early on in the internet days, people would say, well, you don't need to necessarily know the underlying code of how to code a website because there's these tools that will just do it for you. But we feel the same then as we do now, which is understanding the basics of the underlying process will always help you get better and deeper outputs, regardless of what the tech piece is. And the other thing about critical thinking, we are constantly trying to evaluate ways to help our students reach different depth in critical thinking. We feel that learning how to prompt and introducing these frameworks in your school really starts to teach or give a structure to students around how to get to deeper learning, not only in there through the prompting process, but just asking good questions, right? Good prompting is the same as asking good questions. And so we're going to get into some specific frameworks here, some specific demos about what that looks like. So the first strategy I'd like to share with you is something called a single shot prompt, right? And essentially what a single shot prompt is just asking a question or making a request of a chatbot, right? So this is the starting point, right? And some examples that we have that administrator might use is something like create a responsible use policy for generative AI for my middle school. The policy should include clear rules, safety measures, and consequences for misuse. Also include information for parents. And you can see that we have added some additional ones here too. But now let's take that prompt and we're going to try a little demo here and see if we can pull this off. So that first prompt about creating a responsible use policy, I'm going to take that and I'm using ChatGPT right now from OpenAI, and I'm going to paste in that prompt that we just read, and I'm going to say, okay. And here it goes. Notice that it's writing right now the information for parents. It even has signatures at the end and the agreement. Now, there's a couple things about this that I think are important to recognize, which is this is like anything, a first draft, right? We shouldn't blindly just copy this and say, well, there we go. My responsible AI policy is done for my district, all ready to go. But I don't know about you, but when it comes to these type of policy pieces or any sort of writing that, let's be honest, feels a little bit like a drag to get started with, having this to just start to generate some ideas as a catalyst for action. I know what I've found for myself is that this is where I start to save a lot of time, because I have that problem with the blank screen of like, okay, I know I got to do the thing. Where do I start? And then I fumble around for a little while and then I get going. What I've noticed once I started even simple prompting with a chat bot is that fumbling around time, that 10 to 15 minutes of just trying to get started goes away. And it's like, oh, now I'm evaluating and looking through what the first output was so that I can decide, okay, I think the safety measures part is on. I don't really agree with the consequences for misuse because that doesn't align with my school policy. I'm going to make some edits there, but now I'm in it, right? I'm into the work. And so that's an example of our first piece, which is just the simple prompt, right? And this is a totally legitimate way to get started in using any sort of these chatbots.
And when Mike and I talk about prompting, we'll get questions like, "Well, I'm getting what I want. Like, what's wrong with just putting a single prompt in? Nothing. If that's what's getting you what you need, great." But one of the extraordinary powers about these tool sets is that if you are a little more nudgy about it, if you start seeing this as a bigger piece of clay to be molded by you as a writer or a creator, you can go from getting good output to really truly extraordinary output. And so that's strategy number two, which we want to talk about, which is known as multi-shot prompting. And multi-shot prompting, I mean, the nerds will tell you this is a strategy, but the bottom line is that this is just being a good teacher, right? Taking the output that you are trying to get out of the student, which in this case is the AI, and essentially saying, nope, nope, I want this or I want that, right? I'm going to go to, okay, I'll just start with Gemini because that's the tab I have up. So I would like to start some kind of process in my school to get better competency-based education. So I'm going to say draft, of course I can't see anything now, draft and outline on how to get my teachers to move towards competency-based education in the next 18 months. Okay. Now, what Gemini is going to do for me right now is probably pretty good, right? Like there's a lot of literature on competency-based education. There's been a lot of movement towards it in the last a decade or so. So chances are this is probably pretty good stuff. But this is an outline, right? I can copy this and throw it in a Google Doc. I can certainly modify that. But as I start to look down the list here, perhaps I want more detail, right? Or I want it to give me something more than what it's giving me. It's too vague, right? So I'm going to go to part two, understanding the current situation, assess teachers' current understanding and opinions of CB, conduct surveys or interviews. Well, okay, well that's cool, but what would I even ask on a survey? It's like, okay, nice job. And I always try to give it compliments in case the robots are paying attention. Please write a draft survey for me, but remember, my teachers hate this idea. So draft carefully. Is that a frank thing to say? Of course it is, but the AI is not going to judge you. In fact, if anything, it understands your emotional attachment to this more than any computer like interface has in really the history of computing. So it's great. Exploring innovative assessment practices. I like how it's already given a kind of a funny title to it, right? Exploring innovative assessment practices, not, tell me how much you hate competency-based education. We're committed to continuously improve our teaching and assessment practices to best support student learning. This survey attempts to gain your valuable input on exploring innovative approaches to assessment. Your honest feedback is crucial in shaping the future discussions and potential changes. So, section one, it's got a Likert scale in there as well, although it's not all that consistent. Here it's a Likert scale, there it's a kind of a yes and no kind of thing. So not a very good survey, but at least the first start of one, right? So that survey is too nice. Make it more direct to the point. And again, I'm not saying this is what you would say, but you can start to adjust things like the tone, the wording. Just looking at this right now, I think already take out, not fake out, take out as much jargon as you can. We have a couple of anti-jargon folks on our team, so we're very sensitive to jargon words. And so now it's written a new draft of that. And as you start to push and hone and push and hone and push and hone, one of the reasons why I always recommend having a doc up in the background is that you may want to put something in a doc and come back to it later or adjust or modify. If you are using Microsoft Copilot, you can oftentimes do that right in the doc. If you have advanced Gemini, you can do that right in the doc, right? But if not, and you're going back and forth with one of these chatbots, that's the way to do that. But in the end, if you start to give it more input about what you're looking for, that's a way I think to kind of push ahead in that way. The other strategy here that I like to utilize as well is asking it for 7 or 8 examples of something, right? Don't just stick the first one. This is going to be a huge response. Give me 100 survey questions for this survey. And again, it's going to be a ridiculous amount of output. And my guess is it won't even create 100. But it's difficult to provide 100 relevant survey questions without knowing the more specific context. You're right, Gemini, that's correct. But you can see already it is created. Well, it's well on its way to 100. And looking at these just face value, they're not terrible survey questions. Okay. So our third strategy for getting these tool sets to work is, it is called prompting frameworks. And for this, I'm going to go back to Mike.
Thanks, Jason. So we're going to quickly look at a couple different frameworks. And frameworks can be very helpful if you're new to prompting because it provides a set of directions of like how to do the thing. And so the first framework we have is the RTF framework, where you focus on the role, the task, and the format. So what role do you want AI to take? What task do you want the AI to complete, and what should the output look like? So act like a high school principal. Give me a task. Write a morning announcement to staff. Insert the format in a friendly email format, right? And this helps you make sure that you give enough information to the bot so that your first result is decent, right? And then you could still use the multi-prompting strategy to refine further. So this is one framework. The second framework we're going to do a demo on is the Ryzen framework. Some may say Risen. I'm going to go with Ryzen today, but it stands for role, instructions, steps, end goal, and narrowing. And so this is just a little deeper of a prompting strategy that gives that much more input. And so as an example of this, let me give you an example here. So in ChatGPT, I'm going to put in my framework, and notice I just broke it down. I've got the R and the I and the S and the E and the N at the start. It doesn't even matter. ChatGPT is going to help me figure this out. But what I'm doing here is I'm saying, you're an experienced fundraising professional. Please develop a fundraising strategy plan to raise funds for our class trip to the North Pole. Follow these steps. Ask me clarifying questions one at a time, create a detailed campaign plan, develop support materials, including communications, social media posts, and collateral. My end goal is a complete fundraising plan with supporting materials, and then ensure the campaign is engaging, mission aligned, and donor focused. Okay. Now, if you noticed in the steps, I did ask it to ask me some clarifying questions. So that's what I would expect to start out with. So it says, great, let's develop a fundraising campaign step by step. First, I'm going to need some clarifying questions about your campaign. What's your target fundraising goal for this class trip? Oh, let's say we're going to try to raise $10,000. Great. $10,000 targets achievable with the right plan. Question 2, who's the primary audience for this campaign? Are you targeting parents, local community, businesses, or broader audience? Well, let's go with parents and businesses. So for the sake of time, I'm going to stop the demo here, but you get the idea, right? Using the Ryzen method, where we specifically ask the bot to ask clarifying questions, helps to naturally have a give and take with the bot and give it more detailed information so that the final output is much more deeply informed than just a basic prompt to start with. And Jason, I'll hand it back over to you to show the fourth strategy.
Great.
Here.
Thanks, Mike. Yep, we are just about done here. I'm going to show you one more quick demo today, and that is using source materials to help generate responses. And this is something that Mike and I have had a ton of success on, and really it's been kind of revolutionary. And starting with Claude about 18 months ago, you could start attaching documents to your prompts, and that's called context is the way that's referred to in the literature. And there's literally a million ways that this could be really a useful part of the process. But what I'm going to do here is take something that's familiar, and I see there's at least one superintendent on the call today that is something you're familiar with, and that's talking to your school board, right? And so I have a group of minutes here and also an agenda for a school board meeting. I picked a Springfield because Springfield's in 41 states across the United States. I don't even remember what Springfield it was, but a generic school board minutes, generic agenda. Take the role of my school board president, review the agenda and minutes, and tell me of anything that might be a concern to her. Okay. So very common, right? Giving your chair a piece of that information. Um, and it starts off with board attendance, talking about how there's an absentee issue on this particular school board, right? And so the chair might be concerned about getting people to the meeting. I understand that phenomenon for sure. The second, and because again, these are publicly available records, right? So I didn't put any private information in here. You'll have noticed that student 1608 did not meet the residency requirements and is ineligible to attend the district schools. And so it makes recommendations based on that. It talks about harassment, intimidation, bullying reports. It talks about budget concerns. It makes recommendations to me based on that. But essentially, we'll take on the phenomenon of another person's perspective, right? And if you upload all the school board minutes from your meetings. You could even ask it to take on specifics about what it knows about that person. If that person has tended to ask these kinds of questions, or is concerned about this issue, you can start to analyze text in a way that I think is pretty useful to those that have to do this kind of work, right? And the more information you provide, which can include obviously as many documents as you can come up with, the better or the more likely it is that you're going to get a better response. Okay. Well, there it is. A lot of information in 1 hour. I just would repeat the notion that if you're not doing it already, it's time to play with AI. Starting off with one or two tools, particularly if they're your district's adopted tools already, is really the best place to start. And it's time to adopt an adventure posture, right? Because these are like tools we've never seen before. And the more we can do to think about this in a kind of a futuristic way, the better off we're going to be in dealing with these interesting phenomena.
Jason and Mike, I have a question. So
Yeah, please.
when you guys were talking about going into your Google accounts and to your Microsoft accounts, the school that I'm at right now uses a blended resources that we use Outlook, but we use Drive. And when I went in and logged on to Gemini and logged into Copilot, it didn't give me a disclaimer at the bottom. How can I tell if I'm talking to an administrator that that is something that's incorporated with our like our Google for Education program or our Microsoft for Education program?
Yeah, I talk to your IT person and make sure that they have the settings turned on for that. There is in both the Microsoft for Schools and also Google Apps, or not Google Workspace for Education, there is a specific thing you need to toggle in order to agree to the terms of service to add that service there. And one of the advantages that Mike and I have that most schools do not is that we don't give any student accounts out because all of our students are students in another school. We leave it to the school to provide an account. So we're only dealing with adults, but there may be some additional settings that need to be tweaked to make that happen. But my understanding is they just clicked it on at the University of Montana one day, and that's why we have the enterprise protection. It was no more cost to be able to get that. And I believe the same is true of the Google as well. So I go to the IT folks.
Okay. That was my next question, or kind of integrated into it, is where teachers have certain rights and we have access to some AI programs, but our students don't. Yeah. So that would also be just a toggle in either Google or Microsoft if our students have access to that.
Yeah, that's correct.
That was probably set up by the way the organizational units in the actually back end of the structure of either Microsoft or Google are set up. It's not uncommon for those features to be turned on for teachers and not for students and or high school students versus middle school and elementary, because typically on the back end, they're all sectioned off. The other thing that we've noticed too, Diane, just to mention, is as new features are being rolled out, regardless of the platform, it feels like every single new feature has its own toggle. And we've noticed as Google, for instance, has been releasing additional pieces to Gemini, we've had to make a conscious decision each time about what we're turning on. And so again, I think that the stance of the businesses seem to, understandably so, want the end user or the end organization to make a decision each step of the way and not assume. And I actually really appreciate that posture, because then it's not surprising anyone as new functionality is added.
Okay, and last question, you may have touched on this earlier, like if you were to recommend AI detector, which I know that none of them really work really great, is there one that is a standout over the other? I know that you guys at one point were using CopyLeaks.
Yeah, we're continuing to use that, but I mean, I think it's a great question, and I appreciate you saying that, and that's very much our stance. There's no detection tool that is universal. And as a matter of fact, this school year, we're investing quite a lot of time in coming up with a more comprehensive overall plan around what it means to have, you know, uh, an AI forward student facing program, and it's as much about detection as it is about education. There's different frameworks that are out there. The AIAS framework around helping put some guidelines around student assignments that we're looking at to adopt, so that we really believe at MTDA that there's a time and a place for AI use, as we talked about with prompting and critical thinking as one example. There's also a time and a place to show what you know without necessarily AI tools as part of the equation. And so I do think it's really important for districts to think about comprehensively, how do you front load those conversations? How do you train kids that know this isn't necessarily a scary thing? And also, it's really important to decide or to use it at some points and not at others, and to have that continuum. Because if we're not talking about AI use on a continuum, I think we're doing a real disservice to kids, because it's just not the reality. I mean, Jason talked a lot about the fact of, yeah, adults are using these tools in lots of ways, and there's some best practices to it, like don't use it as a last minute thing to try to get something done, because it's probably going to bite you in the rear end. And I think all of those conversations and insights are really important to have with kids too, to help them start to think about, where does AI fit in their life in a healthy way where they're not overdoing it or underdoing it.